Welcome. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the Business Committee meeting of January 13th, 2021 to order. It's with great respect and humility we acknowledge and honor the lands of the Snuneymuxw people. The Snuneymuxw people maintain their profound, unique, and spiritual connection to the land through ageless traditions, teachings, stewardship, and expressions of reciprocity. I'll briefly hand the chair over to Chair McKay with a public announcement. Go ahead, Chair McKay.
Thank you, Trustee Keller. Well, everyone. I just would like to acknowledge that I'm joining you this evening from the Snuneymuxw territory. On behalf of the Board of Education, I'm extremely pleased to share with you today that Scott Saywell will continue on in the role of Superintendent and CEO of Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools. The 4-year contract to July 1st, 2025 will ensure that the district benefits from the consistent and exemplary leadership we have seen from Mr. Saywell these past few years. The board is grateful to have a superintendent who unfailingly puts students at the forefront of his work. His commitment to the CASS framework does not waver, and his like Schwallowen allows him to lead with humility. Positive working relationships and regular conversations with our partner groups, including the NDTA, QP, ENSA, DPAC, and DASC, ensure that all of our education partner voices are shared and heard. Before I close this evening, I'd like to invite Superintendent Saywell to share a few words.
Good evening, Squale. Thank you, Board Chair. Through you, it's a tremendous honor for me to continue in this role and be given this opportunity and responsibility to lead this organization. Working with this board and the senior team has been rewarding work, and I'm excited to see what the next 4 years will bring. I'm very proud of the direction this district is taking, becoming a leader in environmental stewardship and sustainability, ensuring safe and caring, healthy learning and working environments, inclusive of the diversity of our entire learning community, continuously trying to improve instruction and assessment, and trying to reconcile our relationship with our Indigenous brothers and sisters. It's a great day, and no place I'd rather be. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Superintendent Saywell. So I'd like to close my address by inviting you to join me in congratulating Superintendent in his reappointment to the position, as well as thanking the Superintendent, our district leadership team, and all of our staff who have given so much of themselves during the global pandemic. Your work has not gone unnoticed, and I raise my hands to you in thanks. Haisepka. Chair Keller, thank you for allowing me time at the top of your agenda for this announcement.
Great, thanks, Chair McKay, and congratulations and thank you for your service, Superintendent Saywell. Are there any additions to or deletions or changes in order to the agenda? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the agenda? Moved by Trustee McKay, seconded by Trustee O'Neill. Is there any opposition to the approval of the agenda? Seeing none, the agenda is approved. Moving on to the minutes of the December the 9th Business Committee meeting. Can I get a motion to move the minutes? Trustee Wilkinson and seconded by Trustee Berzovich. Is there anyone opposed to moving the minutes? I see that Trustee Stanley has abstained. I believe it was because she was not in attendance at the meeting. Can you please clarify that? Oh, yes, okay, thank you. She's clarified that she was absent for the meeting. Thank you, Trustee Stanley. Okay, so the minutes are approved. There are no presentations this evening. Moving on to section 8, senior staff reports, and we have a report from Secretary Treasurer Walsh. Go ahead, Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, everyone. So this evening, we're going to give a brief financial update. So as you're likely aware, the Ministry of Education confirms its funding amounts for school districts in December based off our September 30 count. And so this is just a brief update because in February we will have our amended annual budget and we get a sense of how we're doing on a quarterly basis. But we thought, given the significant changes and significant needs of COVID, that it was important that the board had a general sense of where we were. So we are pretty satisfied with the outcome of that. So essentially what we made request for and supported with our numbers was approved by the ministry, and we are funded for that. So the impact of that is essentially is a couple of things here, and again we'll be confirming that in the quarterly. But our CEF was approved in full, which is important. So you know, we did have a few classes on the smaller side that theoretically could have been subject to challenge that weren't. So that means that we do have dollars available on that end. The ministry also announced in the first tranche of the federal funds, they held back 10% across the province, and now they've divvied out that 10%. I haven't seen the exact formula that was that they were divvied out on, but it was a combination of full-time equivalent as well as district COVID experience. So for instance, I'm assuming Surrey would have had a higher percentage of those funds than Nanaimo, and we would have had a higher percentage of funds than a district that didn't have any exposures. So that's about 250,000. The other piece to be aware of is that the ministry did say that they have a relatively significant holdback. And so what that means is normally in the last number of years, the ministry gives out all its money at the beginning of the year as it can. In this particular circumstance is that because there are so many districts in probably similar circumstances to us, that being declines in bricks and mortar enrollment and declines of enrollment generally due to COVID, they had funding that Treasury Board approved them for that they just didn't have to divvy out to boards on the basis of the September count. So what that means is we're waiting to hear how that money will be allocated out, but assuming it was an FTE basis, if that was the case, we could be looking at approximately another 800,000 approximately. And then you'll also finally notice that it looks like our international numbers are going to come in higher than budgeted. We put approximately 70 there, so that's increased revenue. Again, we're just waiting to see that those students are actually in place before it gets added to the amended annual budget. So ultimately, the story is to say that we're feeling pretty confident that we are going to be able to support increased initiatives to address a learning loss. But there's a big caveat, and it's an unfortunate caveat, and that's that some of these numbers are not actually solid yet. So number one, and the biggest risk at this point is the federal funds. So as you recall, we got 5.2 million, and we were given our 2.6 up above, or sorry, at the beginning, and then 2.6 was going to come later. Until those numbers are actually given to us, we both can't account for them in our own budget as revenue, and therefore the significant expenses which we've actually staffed against already won't necessarily even be in the amended annual budget either, unless we've heard from the ministry by that point. So of course we're optimistic that those funds are going to come, but we wouldn't have any additional spending because of that risk that's outlined until it's been solidified. Same for international programs. And again, February is going to give us a really good sense of where we're at with respect to that. So the one other piece, and you know, we're always trying to make sure that the board is aware of the various financial issues of the district, and that's on page 9 of the agenda. And perhaps I could ask Ms. Matthews if that's available to bring up. If you could bring up page 9 of the agenda, Appendix A of, it's labeled Appendix A. It's the summary of grants. Okay, so while Ms. Matthews is bringing it up, I wanted to highlight that our district gets a relatively healthy amount of the classroom education fund across the district or across the province, due specifically to our collective agreement language. And so, for instance, when that 1991 language came back, ours was restrictive in the sense that we required many more teachers, as did a number of districts, and that grant table is there as well. So we made out reasonably well as a district, and some districts with less restrictive language wouldn't have got additional funds. But in our operating grant itself, and I'm sure that the board has heard of this before, but I just want to bring it again to our attention so we're aware of it, is that if we go down to School District 68 and we flow across to the number under pay equity, the pay equity a number for our district is $160,000. And to put that in context, Prince George, which is a smaller school district than us, gets $2.2 million in pay equity. And what that is that our district, I can only assume, was way ahead of its time. So working with our unions 20 and 30 years ago, we came up with pay scales that were properly paid both of our sides of our system at that time. So at one point, the trades custodial side would have been likely paid higher than the support staff, EA side that's typically more female dominated. And so what happened is, to bring everybody's positions of equal responsibility up to the same, districts needed to increase that. And so the Ministry of Education gives a grant to support that difference. But because our district, and this is my understanding, is our district was so far ahead of the game, we didn't need a grant to make that happen. And so when you look across the way that the operating fund is allocated, there are certainly geographic and slight differences based off of socioeconomic realities. But the single biggest disparate number in this operating fund is that pay equity. And so if you could imagine, if we were getting anywhere near, again, Prince George, somewhat similar size, we'd be looking at another $2 million in our budget. And so I'm not suggesting to take any action because this has been a long-standing issue. I just wanted to raise it again so that the board is reminded of this particular issue. So that's a bit of an aside, but again, so happy to answer any questions on the generic financial update. Again, remembering that we will be back in the February with the amended annual budget with some very solid numbers, with a forecast on how we're going to be able to support kids this year to address the various priorities of COVID and other issues.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Is there any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Walsh, and we'll move on to 8.2, Executive Director of Planning and Operations, Pete Sabo.
And Mr. Chair, would it be okay if I just introduced Mr. Sabo briefly?
Please.
So obviously everybody knows Mr. Sabo, but I wanted to take just a moment before the presentation, because the board, I'm sure, has reviewed the documents, just to express appreciation to Mr. Sabo, his team, the entire facilities department. They have an enormous schedule of tasks, both major and minor, and I've just been so impressed with their ability to stick handle these multiplicity of projects, their diversity in nature, working with external parties, bringing work in-house, doing all kinds of things like that. It's just, I would suggest that it's unprecedented, and maybe Mr. Sabo can correct me on that, but I just really wanted to express appreciation.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Walsh. What a great introduction. I hope I can live up to that in my presentation. And I do appreciate the kind words, as our staff do put significant energies into those areas. Tonight I have a brief slideshow, and it's a follow-up on the item attached to the agenda. On your page 16 of the agenda, there's a number of capital projects, not every one of our capital projects, but the lion's share of them. And as I go through the presentation, I may not touch on a project that you have a question on. Feel free at the end to touch on questions on projects that I may not have presented. Also, as I go through the slideshow, I'm happy to entertain questions as we proceed, as they come to people's minds. Now I will share my slideshow. And if I can get confirmation that that people can see that. Okay, thank you. The first project that I wanted to comment on, we're really excited about it. That's the expansion to Hammond Bay. The tenders closed for that project on December 18th, and we received 9 bids, which is quite significant with respect to bidding activities. The low tender was favorable, and we're currently going through the process of evaluating the tender and preparing the submission package to the ministry for award of the contract. Ministry submission and approval is required, as there's some supplementary funding that the ministry needs to approve prior to awarding a contract. The project will be about 52 weeks to substantial completion after award, and it puts the opening day on or about February of 2022. Couple of significant things. It will free up 5 portables after occupancy. It does provide expanded intake for a third French immersion K intake, and of course the space for that increased capacity over as they move through the grades. And synergistic projects include IT infrastructure, exterior painting, access improvements to student parking, parking. And I didn't want to show the site plan, and so you can see in beige the proposed 2-story addition, and it is in the location that the portables were previously placed. They have been relocated so that the addition can proceed. We are doing significant improvements to the parking lot and paving it, which is a long-standing request of the school. And down you can see I've done a breakout plan on the right-hand side. We're working with the city of Nanaimo to have them complete a synergistic project of a traffic circle right in front of the school parking lot and in front of the Neck Point parking lot. And what this will allow is people to have better traffic movement going onto the site, coming off of the site, deciding to not go onto the site and getting into Neck Point, etc. So we're pretty excited about that that item. I'll pause and see if there's any questions.
Not yet, Mr. Sabo. Please continue.
Going the wrong way. Okay. So up on the top left-hand side, you can see an elevation from the entry to the parking lot of what the new building will look like. And on the right-hand side, I've indicated the floor plans, the main floor on the upper as the upper drawing and the lower floor as the lower drawing. And on the left-hand side at the bottom, you can see the complex elevations of the access ramp. And so if you look up in the yellow part at the main entry, you can see that we have an access ramp up to the upper floor to facilitate access to connect the school. And then there's a lift device within the school to get students and staff to the lower floor. There's also been consideration for First Nations art contribution to the project. And while we haven't finalized anything, there is potential for that to be included. I'll move on to Pleasant Valley, a significant seismic project. We're going to be upgrading 3 blocks in Pleasant Valley. One block is new enough that it doesn't require upgrading. That's block 4. The significant upgrades are to the 2-story classroom block. We'll be doing this project via construction manager Proposals for a construction manager are expected to go out very shortly. The upgrades will take place during this 21-22 school year, and during that period of time, the students and staff will be operating out of the Rutherford Elementary School, which is currently being, well, that's the next slide. So I'll talk a little bit about synergistic projects for Pleasant Valley. We're planning an IT infrastructure, exterior painting, improvements to the school parking, gym floor upgrade, which we're actually taking the wood out of the Franklin Street gym and going to install it into Pleasant Valley, and decorative structures. And as you can see at the bottom, you can see a picture of an illustration of what the school will look like after. And you can see that we built in some decorative structures, including some ability to include First Nations designs into the building. Rutherford Swing Space is, we're just awarding contracts for the alterations to Rutherford. That work is expected to continue from now till June 2021, at which time the school will be ready for staff to set up operations for the school operation for the 21-22 school year. The school will also be in a position to be used for future seismic projects. Solaire Seismic, it runs at the same schedule as Pleasant Valley, and it uses Woodlands as swing space. So there are two projects that have been being designed in tandem, and there's been a significant amount of efficiencies because of that. Again, it's going to be procured via construction manager. Proposals go out for a construction manager this month. And we plan to upgrade the school during the 21-22 school year, during which Solaire will occupy a portion of Woodlands. Synergistic projects, things the students can expect to see when they return on top of a seismic upgrade, include the IT infrastructure, exterior painting, improvements to school parking, decorative structures, and accessibility upgrades. At Woodlands, we've been working quite hard to make sure that all of the items are in place as it's currently designed as a secondary school, and we have to have an elementary school operation. Plus, we're also working around a number of other uses in Woodland School. And again, that work is expected to be underway in January to June of this year, and ready for setup for the school for next school year as of June 30th. And again, improvements are designed with consideration for future swing space. Dover Bay Secondary School, we're approved for an internal expansion. So as you can see at the bottom, there are two project areas, the green and the blue, which are currently underutilized space, and they were designed in the original building to be utilized as classrooms. So the ministry supported us to renovate those spaces to increase the capacity of the school and reduce portables. And so the pink spaces are classroom. The blue space is a breakout area. So it's a number of rooms that the schools can use for different functions. And the green area is a flex space, which can be used as a classroom and or physical education or any other. So it's essentially a smaller multi-purpose room. Currently the PDR, or the project definition report, is being finalized and for consideration by the Ministry of Education. An exciting project that we're getting underway is our daycare projects, and so there's 5 of those projects: Forest Park, Chase River, Ladysmith, Rock City, and QQS. It's a project funded by MCFD, and the studio designs are now complete, and you can see in the photo up in the top left corner the current status or month-old status of the before and after care studio that's going to go on Forest Park. District forces are constructing the 4 before and after care studios, 2 of them with participation by the learning alternative students and 2 by our capital crews. 5 daycare studios are planned to be procured via public tender, and that will go this January. And we expect the projects to complete starting in September of 2021 and working through late into the fall of 2021. We have closed the request for expression of interest for licensed childcare operators for the facilities, and that's currently under review. Here's an example of the design of the floor plan. So the upper floor plan is the triple wide modular for the daycares, and you can see that there's different age groups on either side of a core infrastructure. And this is very much like the John Barsby daycare modular. We based it off that template. And below you can see the before and after care studio, and that's a double wide modular unit. A project that our Rob Lumsden, energy manager, has been working very hard at as being project lead is our IT infrastructure upgrade, and we're quite excited about this project. So the project is about 20% complete at this point, and we've expended about $930,000. The total project delivery envelope is estimated at $4.5 million and expected to take just slightly over 3 school years to complete. And so the first school year in earnest is 2021, so we expect to be complete on or about June of 2023. It is being jointly managed and delivered by facilities and IT. And we are working very close, the two departments are working very closely. Facilities is taking leadership of the project delivery as well as coordination of the design. And the design is jointly between facilities and IT, where facilities is looking more at the design and installation of the wiring, where IT is looking after the design and installation of the devices that make the network live. Our annual facilities grant, we get 2.7 million, approximately 2.7 million every year. This year we have approximately 73 projects underway. We expect to have the project wrapped up by the end of March. Planning for next year's AFG is currently underway, and it involves reviewing school project requests. We ask each school to submit a 5-year plan with clearly illustrated priorities for our consideration. Project team leads we work with them to find alignments in capital projects so that we can make sure that if a school's got a request that we can put into a capital project. We're working currently with the Learning Services Department to wrap up their priorities, and we'll be working with the leadership team after that to prepare the final program. Project planning is primarily by district facilities planners, so in-house staff with some help from engineers and outside consultants. We expect to bring next year's plan to the business committee for information in early March. And this slide almost seems like I'm shouting it, but we'll pause for any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sabo, for that very informative presentation. Is there any trustees or any of our partners who have any questions for Mr. Sabo? I don't see any in the chat, Mr. Sabo. I do have a question, if that's okay.
Yes.
I'm curious, just with respect to the seismic projects related to Pleasant Valley and Solaire, how and when are we planning to advise parents around the changes, and will there be any changes to transportation to accommodate those students?
Yeah, so we're working with each school, and we have formed a transition committee, and information is discussed at the committee, and schools will then be reporting out through their normal channels and PAC groups, staff meetings, etc. And I know that that's currently underway with getting down into the details. And so I know for Pleasant Valley that our last transition committee meeting, we discussed the principal's plan to be releasing detailed information on the organization around moving and detailed information on the bus routes, bus time schedules, etc. Both projects have busing, which is part of the project, and the Ministry of Education has allowed us to replaced a few buses that we've replaced for this very purpose, to expand our busing during the seismic program. If we get more seismic programs that require busing, we'll keep those buses on. If we don't require busing in the future, then we will then dispose of those buses.
Great, thank you, Mr. Sabo. I see we do have a question from Trustee Higginson. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Mr. Sabo, for this presentation and all the information. It was nice and succinct, and I could sort of get most of the information I needed. Something I have that wasn't quite answered, and I think it's come up before, is just around the fact that Hammond Bay is also, if I'm correct, has a seismic rating on it that requires some seismic mitigation, but I noticed that it's not part of the synergistic projects. So I'm just wondering if it does have a seismic, and if that means that there's just going to be further construction on the school at another time.
So Hammond Bay was upgraded previously meaning about 20 years ago or so, and it was recognized that it required seismic upgrading. So the district had a significant amount of discussion with the ministry during the design, during the PDR stage, of whether or not we should include the seismic upgrade of Hammond Bay in the addition project. At that time, the ministry indicated that they would not support the seismic upgrading of the older part of Hammond Bay. In fact, we chose an option that would allow us to proceed without significantly disrupting the existing building. So you can see that the new addition is very much like Frank Jane, where it doesn't touch the existing footprint very much, and there's no internal reorganization required. Very little reorganization, which can trigger seismic upgrades. And so the ministry has indicated that they would look to upgrade Hammond Bay as it was prioritized by the district and the ministry in future seismic upgrade plans.
Thanks. Could I just have a quick follow-up, Chair?
You may.
Thanks. It's more of a comment that I just do want to reinforce the wonderful introduction that you and your team were given at the beginning. Since I've been a trustee, the facilities department has, evolved a lot through a lot of changes, but most importantly been in constant flux with the number of changes, both, created by the board through closures and reopens and all this type of stuff, but as well as the Supreme Court and reopening classrooms, and holy cow, the list goes on. And now the SRG3 upgrades, in I think 22 schools or whatever it is. So you guys have just always continued to be able to be dynamic and meet the needs of the students. And I'm very appreciative of the way that you do that. And I'm also surprised that you're not all exhausted. So thank you for your dedication to keeping the schools safe for the students.
Well, thank you very much, and we're very excited, and I have been very engaged over the years by our capital program and the changes in the district. We're very excited about the seismic program and the fact that capital funding is going to touch so many facilities and give us the opportunities to provide alignment with other upgrades that are required. The Ministry of Education does indicate that they really want to contain the seismic upgrades to simply seismic upgrades and not reconstruction of buildings. However, there are very good opportunities within those boundaries. I did want to, Chair, I did want to comment on one other thing. We are experiencing early cost pressures on the first daycare project, and we're working closely with MCFD and our estimators and the project to see for opportunities for us to reduce those estimated costs and to find other solutions. So some of the pressures we're seeing on Forest Park, for example, we expected to relocate some playground equipment. It turns out that playground equipment is at the end of its life. So while we have funding to relocate it, we have a cost to actually provide additional or to provide new play equipment. So we're working through that. We've run into some soils conditions where we had to dig out a little bit more soil than we thought to for the buildings. We also have a city bylaw that requires us to put sprinkler systems in these buildings over a certain size. So regardless of the fact that it's a portable, once it gets, or a modular, once it gets over a certain size, it requires a fire sprinkler system. And then of course, we've seen some pressures with respect to COVID. Material costs have been pushed up a little bit. So we're working on a few solutions to that, including MCFD has given us the ability to move funding around. So if one project is under budget, they've indicated we can apply that surplus funding to projects that may have project pressures. And I see Secretary Treasurer Walsh has popped up on my screen, and he may have something to add.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Sabo. I just wanted to add, Mr. Chair, if that's okay, that one of the places where we're not actually facing cost pressures with respect to these builds is the fact that we used our in-house forces. And so far so good with that particular aspect of those installations.
Great, thank you, Mr. Walsh and Mr. Sabo. We have another question here from Trustee Stanley. Go ahead, Trustee Stanley.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Mr. Saywell. This is it's not in your presentation, but it was in your report in our agenda. And that was just with regards to the greenhouse gas emissions reductions that were noted. So no need to go in depth, but I'm just wondering if you could just give us a little bit of some information about how it is that we are achieving greenhouse gas emission reductions that were mentioned, in the carbon neutral capital plan. So, just curious, what are we doing?
Oh, sure. We've got some work going on in a number of areas. And so I've shown some, I have a slide in my back pocket. I didn't want to have too big of a slideshow, but I had prepared this one. So we are expecting 2 electric buses in February. And some of the photos there you see is the extensive preparation required for the electrical infrastructure for those buses. It is scalable up to 10 with the work we put in now. And so you could imagine that a significant amount of greenhouse gas is reduced, changing from gas and diesel buses to electric. We have done a significant amount of work with Gabriola Island. We had a failed fuel tank, above ground fuel tank. It was double walled, so there was no leaking fuel on the site, but we did need to do something. So we did a fuel switch, and we utilized an existing propane system that we had on the site, and we converted a number of furnaces, air handling units into propane fed rather than fossil fuel. And not only do we expect reduce utility bills, but of course a greenhouse gas emission. And so that's a couple. Now we also have recently in local capital, the board has seen fit to approve $400,000 for environmental upgrades. And so staff are currently doing energy studies to determine the highest and best use of that funding, meaning we're targeting it towards greenhouse gas reductions and infrastructure upgrade. And so those are some of the greenhouse gas initiatives we have now. Obviously, every time we touch a capital project, every time we upgrade something, every time something fails, it's viewed as an opportunity to apply the greenhouse gas reduction goals. And we're always looking for opportunities with respect to low carbon electrification. So in other words, we're trying to move away from fossil fuels and going into electrical use, namely heat pumps, significantly heat pumps at this time.
Trustee Stanley, did you have any follow-up for Mr. Sabo?
No, just appreciation to hear that aspect of the story. It's I'm very grateful. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks again, Mr. Sabo, for your presentation. I always appreciate getting updates on our facilities. I don't see any further questions in the chat box, so I'll thank you again for your presentation. And we'll move on to item 8.3, Secretary Treasurer Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on page 38 of the agenda is just another in our desire to get our APs up to date again, so that either we have them up to date or we do not have them, we are bringing forward one for deletion to inform the board that we're deleting Administrative Procedure 507, that's fencing. And to be clear, we cannot remember in the institutional memory the last time this AP was actually enforced in the manner that is written. So it envisions asking neighbors to pay 50% of the fencing cost next to a school. In the rural area is barbed wire, in urban areas it's wood. And so it's just not something that we do and not something that we intend to do. So for instance, we don't go to the neighbors and ask for additional monies for fencing. And we tend to have, kind of a single form for both the quality and length of service of the infrastructure. And obviously with the few exceptions, such as facilities has some barbed wire, that's not something that we put at our schools. So really redundant one, but again, we just want to be proactive in trying to take them down if we're not intending to actually go through with the requirements of the AP.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer Walsh. I don't see any questions. I'll give trustees a quick second. Actually, I have a comment from Trustee Stanley. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'll just make this brief, just because, so through the chair to Secretary Treasurer Walsh, I don't want the cleaning up of our APs and policies to be a thankless task, because I do think it's really important that we are going through these APs and getting rid of the ones that are out of date or entirely useless. So thank you. I think that this policy work and procedure work is extremely important. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew that your efforts were appreciated.
Great. Thanks again, Mr. Walsh. And I see no further questions or comments, so we'll move on to item 8.4. Back to you, Mr. Walsh, for an update on our long-range facilities plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this evening, just providing the board a brief update about the status of the LRFP. So our intention was to have it actually at this meeting, but a few things have caused minor delays, but we do think that we are on track. And so the delays are mainly associated with our enrollment projections. And so both our short and our long-term projections. So what we're doing right now, and I just want to highlight the great efforts by Ms. Sutton working with our projections, particularly with respect to the short term. So what we're doing right now is we're taking our Beauregard numbers, which is our typical system to make projections. We're looking at those and making sure that those numbers kind of jive with the realities of COVID. And so what we've seen is the 2019 projections that we would have had with Beauregard are going to be significantly different than the projections that we have for the coming year. So, but what we're trying to make sure is that we are capturing the kids that are going to be coming back from DL, assuming they are, capturing the kids that are coming back from homeschool into their homeschools. And so in order to do that, though, it takes a bit of manual work. And what we don't want to do is, because the long range facilities plan is going to have both shorter term recommendations and longer term recommendations. And what we don't want to do is come back to the board with a shorter term recommendation in the long range facilities plan that's not completely supportable. And so we just need those numbers in order to be able to do that. On the other side of the coin is the consultant that we've hired to get our slightly longer term projections is now they've spent time getting data from RDN, from Lanceville, from Ladysmith, from City of Nanaimo, and we'll still get some from the Islands Trust with respect to what those various jurisdictions say that their future growth numbers are. And we'll probably have the consultants come in to do a presentation to the board at some point about what their methodology was and what they've done. But to date now, they have all of that data from our regional partners, and it took a little bit of time, understandably, to get it from all of our partners. They're taking that growth data, they're now overlaying what they are thinking is how many kids each dwelling is going to produce So if you're going to build a house in Nanaimo in 2025, that's going to produce X number of kids. If you rent a house in Nanaimo that was built in 1972, that produces this number of kids. Take those growth numbers up to 2030 and then tell us what they think, how many kids we're going to have based on catchment. And then, of course, overlaying the French immersion numbers. And so that work is coming to a conclusion with that group. And then we're going to probably get them to run a couple of scenarios depending on what those numbers are. Again, we just don't have it in our hands to be able to present in January. So February is the date. We may ask the indulgence of the board to have a special meeting if it's going to run past the business meeting date, but February is when we will be back to the board with that information for a first glance or first reading, however you want to term it.
Thank you for that information, Mr. Walsh. I'm very pleased to hear that you and your staff are working so hard on providing very comprehensive development projections to inform the long-range facilities plan. So thank you for that. I see that we have first question here is from Trustee Higginson. Go ahead, Trustee Higginson.
Sorry, I'm having a microphone issue. There we go. My question is twofold. Well, actually I have two, so I'll just go back on the list because I can't remember the second one, but I know I had two. So the first one, though, is a request that if this does require a special meeting, that we actually make it a special meeting of the business committee, because I always do really appreciate the opportunity for the stakeholders that are at the committee table to provide their input. So rather than it just being a special meeting of the board, that if it's required, it be a special meeting of the business committee so we can have that initial input from stakeholders as well. And you just put me on the list because I can't remember the second one. Thank you.
Well, you're just in luck, Trustee Higginson, because there's nobody else on the list, so go ahead.
Okay, I do remember it. I just want to make sure that we are working closely with the town of Ladysmith staff and that there's not going to be any surprises, because I know that we have worked with them on previous and other iterations of plans, and I just want to make sure that there's no surprises to the town of Ladysmith before this is, you know, an unofficially public document that causes them to be in reaction mode.
Sure, maybe I could respond if that's okay, Chair. Yeah, so just so everyone is aware, so with respect to Ladysmith, we've well, with respect to all our partners, we've indicated our intention of seeking a school site acquisition charge. At the same time, we've indicated that we are working through a long-range facilities plan. We are working off of the data that they've provided in addition to the Beauregard data, but our consultants have been in contact with Ladysmith, and we intend to provide and share all that information at the end of the day. And we have said as a courtesy that we would intend to provide the draft document to the groups as well, and we may meet with them in advance depending on the nature of the recommendations. So, but thank you very much for the input. We absolutely will contact our partners.
Great, thank you. And did you have a follow-up, Trustee Higginson? And I see Superintendent Saywell popped up. Did you want to say something, Superintendent?
Yeah, just thank you, through you, Chair. Just on that note, I did meet with Allison McGarrick, the new CAO of the town of Ladysmith, yesterday, and we're planning to meet with the staff and then engaging the board with the council in a meeting very soon. So more to follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Saywell. So I don't see any further questions in the chat. So I'd like to thank again Mr. Walsh for your presentations this evening. And we'll move on to correspondence. I don't believe we have any correspondence or unfinished business or new business this evening. Karen, are there any questions in the? No questions this evening. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Moved by Trustee Stanley and seconded by Trustee O'Neill. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good evening.